Hi, in this recording, we are going to talk about a method that you can use for determining the theme of a story. So, I am once again going to use the book Stone Soup as a model. So, the way that I determine theme in a story that I read is I consider what characters learn in the book, and I also consider the ways in which their behavior changes or how their emotions change in the story. So, by considering what characters learn and considering how they change emotionally and behaviorally, it helps me determine what the author wants me to take away from the story. Remember, the theme is the message of the story, or what is it that the author wants you to learn or find out as a result of reading the story. So, let me demonstrate here using Stone Soup. So, in filling out this graphic organizer I have here, I considered knowledge. What did the characters learn in the story? So here I wrote down that the peasants learned how to make stone soup, and I was a little bit more specific. I consider making stone soup a metaphor for learning how to share with other people and be accepting of other people. To bring other people into the fold of the community is how I interpret making stone soup. So I feel like that's something the peasants learned because we see that, at the beginning of the book, they were not willing to share, and they learned later in the book the importance of sharing, right? So, based on what the peasants learned, I tried to make a general statement about what a person might learn from, how the peasants or what knowledge the peasants gained in the story. And I wrote, sharing what you have will not be to your detriment, it will benefit everyone. So I feel like that's an important message the author in the story is trying to communicate. The peasants learn this, but we also learn it too. Then let's look over at this one here. I wrote that the soldiers learned that the peasants could be tricked into sharing their food. So I kind of get the impression that the soldiers are pretty slick and perhaps have pulled the stone soup thing on other villagers before, but I can't be sure of that. So for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that the soldiers, maybe this is their first time tricking peasants into making stone soup. And in this story, the soldiers learn that tricking peasants into sharing their food can be to their benefit. So I think that, this particular lesson that the soldiers learn in this story is also what you might argue is a theme of this story. You might argue that deceiving people is acceptable if it helps you get what you want. As long as there's a positive outcome, it's okay to trick people to get what you want. And I think that, what the soldiers did was ultimately beneficial to the peasants because it really changed their outlook in a more positive way. So I'm not saying what the soldiers did was necessarily bad, but you could argue that the soldiers were also deceptive, and you might think that a theme of the story is that being clever and deceiving others can help you achieve your own goals. And we really do see that with the soldiers in the story. So once again, I thought about what the soldiers learned, and I made a generalized statement about what could be learned based on this particular event in the story of the soldiers learning that they could trick the peasants. So, and these generalized statements that I'm making here could be considered some of the themes of the story. So moving on, now I'm looking at behavioral and emotional changes in the book. So one thing I noticed is that the behavior of the peasants changed quite a bit in the story. So at the beginning of the story, they acted very selfish and suspicious. They didn't want anything to do with the soldiers, but at the end of the book, they were very welcoming to the soldiers and they were generous. They shared all their food and they made stone soup together. So I generalized that, and I wrote here that nobody benefits from selfishness. Really, everybody wins when people are generous and caring towards one another. I also considered this emotional change here. The peasants worry about themselves at the beginning of the book. They're really concerned about having enough food for themselves and their own families. But at the end of the book, they are much more open-hearted and willing to share. I think that they're in a better place emotionally. They just seem like better people at the end of the story. And once again, I made this generalized statement. Pitching in and helping can benefit everybody, and people should work toward the good of all, not the good of the individual. So again, I'm taking something specific from the book, a specific change that the characters experienced, and I'm generalizing it so I can make a statement that's sort of a universal truth. And I consider these generalized statements different themes of the story. So a lot of these themes that I wrote down in this column here, in the rightmost column, all relate to the idea that, selfishness is bad and sharing is good. So that's really one of the major themes of Stone Soup. And again, I didn't just make that up. I really thought about what did characters learn and how did they change behaviorally and emotionally. And that helped me determine what are some of the big messages that the author wants me to take away. And certainly you might come up with some other themes with Stone Soup, and certainly there are more. But these are just some that you might pick out from reading the book. And I feel like using this method of considering what characters learn and how they change as a way of helping you identify some of the major themes that you might take away from a story. And again, theme is not the easiest story element to teach. Certainly things like setting and character are much more concrete, whereas theme is a little bit, you might call it squishy, so to speak. And certainly this is not the only way to teach theme. In fact, I've posted another video to Blackboard about another method that you might use for teaching theme, and that video comes from the teaching channel. So you have a couple different ideas in your teaching toolbox for learning how to teach theme as a result of this week.